think I may have made a video on hypergame theory, but I don't know. I don't remember. But I want to talk about it a little bit because it does, as a basic thought form, it very well encompasses what we see here in our reality. And the things that Matt talks about all the time fit very well within this, and the things that I talk about in the way that I speak, it fits within this mental understanding of how sentient organisms play or interact. You don't have to use the word play. Play is the things, as you will see, even within the construct or the model of hypergame theory, even within that, there's always room for conjecture, because the thing itself is constantly evolving. So, and this is also connected with the TI stuff. Exactly to what extent it is theory, like directly applied theory, and how much of it is the subjective resonance of the person who feels they're being targeted, having that reverberation effect and actually contributing to the change. How much is of the prior and how much is of the latter, I'm not sure. And even that thought form is contained within the idea of the hypergame theory. Like Brian 2 says, the hypergame theory is a combination of game theory and decision tree modeling. And the decision tree modeling part of it is where computers come in. That's what algorithms are. Trees of knowledge are created and links are made that are very difficult on many levels to understand if you're not a quantum computer. Now, it could also be argued that we are quantum computers, but it's just a difficult thing to talk about. It's difficult to really to make sense out of worldviews when they are so subjective. It's difficult to have a collective understanding when each person's model is essentially a different universe. So hypergame theory, game theory combined with decision tree modeling, and possibly combined with AI / supercomputers / quantum computing abilities, and you have and then combined with the human, which is very likely quantum already, and very likely a combination of all of these things from the get-go, just organized in different ways to provide unique experiences for every human. But essentially what it says is that in hypergame theory, the players they're not all aware of the entire rule set of the game. That's like the nuts and bolts of it. And it is not known from the meta perspective. It is not known who has which knowledge. So if we're playing a chess game and the only difference between two players is that one player doesn't know he can play en passant, right? Which is a really weird looking move. It doesn't even look like it belongs on the board. And to describe what an en passant is, if you have someone say they've played d5 already, and then they played d5 already, and then they played d4, right? You didn't take the center with d4 yourself. So they played d5, you played whatever, maybe knight f3, then they played d4. Okay? And you play c5. Now your pawn has scooted up right next to their pawn, and they can take your pawn out on c3. Your pawn is not sitting on c3. your pawn is sitting on c4, right? You just moved it up next to the d5 pawn that was pushed. But that one weird quirky rule makes it so the capture can be taken where the piece doesn't even exist. Now, in the hypergame context, the meta overarching theory of that particular player knowledge set, the only difference between the two is that one player knows capturing pawns en passant via en passant is legal, and the other player doesn't know about it. So if d4 and d5 was played and then c5 was played, and white did not know about en passant, then he could possibly lose the game because he didn't know about it, depending on the structure of the following play, right? So in that sense, you have two worldviews. Him not knowing en passant is not necessarily a bad thing either. If you want to couch it in terms of good and evil, which I tend not to do, but it can be seen as it's like a grandmaster playing odds, an odds game, like a knight odds game or a rook odds, where the grandmaster will give up a rook and to play against, maybe a 2000 or 1800 player, and they can play the game and have a very interesting game and a somewhat even game, right? Just because they changed the sort of odds of the game. They didn't start off equally because one had much higher skill level. That would not fall into the category of hypergame theory, though, because they both know what the change was that was made. They're both aware of the original rule set of the game. Hypergame theory inherently understands that some players have this specific amount of knowledge and some players have much higher knowledge, some players have less, some players have no knowledge. And it's almost like a universal theory of everything, as far as just the thoughtscape. And it allows for people not to have a hissy fit every time something happens that they can't understand, right? Of course, as applied to TIs, it's not, you could argue that that's a bad thing, but at the same time, if you are a TI and maybe you're inside of a game, maybe this is not like life as everyone has always called it, and maybe you're inside of some 3D simulation and you forgot about it or something. Like, hypergame theory allows for your worldviews to remain flowing and not be stuck on Alan Watts' ceramic model of the universe. And if something is coming at you which is behaving outside of your rule set, then that thing is at an advantage to you. But if you realize, and again, it fractals up and down. If you realize, oh, I'm inside of the hypergame theory, then that means I can expand my rule set to include the behavior of this entity or creature or whatever. If it's attacking you or if it's doing whatever, you can expand your rule set to include that thing. Not as like, oh, this is a boogie monster or this is a devil or this is a demon, because generally speaking, doing that with anything gives it power, right? You're not wanting to give these things power, you're wanting to include it sort of matter-of-factly as much as possible. I understand it's not always possible, but as much as possible, staying neutral, include that set into your knowledge, your knowledge base, or at least your possibility base, right? Because if you're able to allow multiple worldviews to flow in and out of you, then you start understanding why this place appears kind of odd, because it seems like that. It seems like lots of different realities flowing in and out of each other, and it's because of the humans, because the humans are all at different levels, and then, there could be other beings here we don't know exactly. There are levels of perception, everybody has blinders on to an extent. We're seeing only a very small shred of the electromagnetic spectrum, of the visual spectrum, even all of it, you could argue, that has been sort of shunted down into this very narrow view. But the knowledge of hypergame theory is helpful to just be aware of, because then you can see the other people as players, if you wish, in the game of life, right? And they're playing by their own internalized knowledge, and you don't know what that is exactly. You don't know what that is. You have to guess. Unless you ask them, like, hey, what rules are you playing by, you know? And, you know, who knows if they're gonna even accept that question or not. Maybe they will. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on the hypergame theory, and yeah, take care, people. Peace!